Welcome to Accelerate OC, the only show focused on the people leading innovation in Orange County. Join our host, Kerry Ransom, in his conversations with the trendsetters, entrepreneurs, investors, and leaders here, because it's time to Accelerate OC.
Welcome to the Accelerate Show. I am Kerry Ransom, and I am very happy today to welcome my friend Kate Buckley. And Kate is probably one of the world experts in premium domains. And we met a couple years ago, and I think we really connected around this idea of brand and how important domain is in today's world in the overall brand and naming of a company for credibility, clarity, a whole bunch of other reasons. And so given that we work with so many startups through OC4 and the Venture Studio and this Southern California startup community, I wanted to get Kate on the record talking about a lot of the brilliance and ideas that she has around premium domains. So really excited to have you here today, Kate, and thanks for joining me.
Oh, thank you, Kerry. It's great to see you again, and I'm really excited to have this conversation with you. And I'm just a big fan of everything that you guys are doing right now.
Well, unfortunately, we're not able to do it in person, even though we're only a few miles apart. But right. Such is the reality of the world we're in today.
Yeah.
So, well, let me get to. I've got questions for days, as you know, but let's talk initially, just give me a little bit of background. Like, how did you initially even get into this world of premium domains?
Yeah, thanks for asking. I got into domain names in, I'm going to date myself here, 1998 by industry pioneers, David and Michael Costello. They're very Googleable. I knew very little, quite frankly, about the business beforehand. I came from some of the biggest ad agencies in the world. I'd moved to, you and I bonded over Indiana and Kentucky. Mm-hmm. After my graduation from college, I moved up to New York and worked for Gray and Landor. Mm-hmm. Yet I knew virtually nothing about domain names when I first met David in 98. I was then recruited by David and Michael to help them launch and monetize their network of premium domains. And it was a light bulb moment. I immediately realized the endless possibilities of premium domains and was quite frankly shocked that they could generate so much money as brand platforms. Mm-hmm. So that's how I got started. I had the privilege of working with them for over 20 years and learned firsthand how to advance a business built on virtual barren land, if you will, starting with one of our neighbors here in Orange County, PalmSprings.com. After David and I got PalmSprings.com up to $1 million a year in revenue, we launched LagunaBeach.com, which is how I came to Laguna. We launched that in 2000. I also worked on many others with them, including one of my favorites, Nashville.com. And then I'll give you a super quick background as to how I came to start Buckley Media. Mm-hmm. I approached David and Michael in 2013 and offered to sell LagunaBeach.com for them. And here's why. I'd been tracking what was going on with geodomains. Mm-hmm. You had OTAs and DMOs really changing the space. And I felt the time was right to liquidate that particular asset. So I set about the process of taking it to market, which I'll be honest was a very steep learning curve. I knew nothing about domain brokerage and decided to teach myself the business from the ground up, learning from a multitude of resources. Funny enough, all outside the domain world, and you'll appreciate this. I talked to venture capitalists. I talked to private equity. I talked to accelerators. I talked to branders, marketers, et cetera. And it paid off. I sold LagunaBeach.com to a media group for a record-setting $600,000 in October of 2013. I then developed a business plan and marketing blueprint, and the acquirers of LagunaBeach.com hired me to act as interim CEO and put my business and marketing plan into play. And that's how Buckley Media was born.
Okay. Great story. Well, thank you for taking us on that tour. And I think, one of the things that highlights to me is often you can find great value in a market when you go and study outside markets. And you
100%.
talk, and that's been, I think, a key part of my career has been similar, where I experienced something in a certain industry or a certain market, and sort of look at it in a more objective way, come into a new market and say, well, they haven't adjusted or changed in this way. What if you tried this here? Could that work?
Exactly.
So great example, how you did that with that domain. So what's been most surprising? I mean, you've now been in domains for a long time. I when you were first describing, what I felt like a lot of these domains were back in the 90s when I really started to see them, is they were barren land that people just figured out how to pass through and almost collect a toll or a tax, for passing through the gates. And really, they've become much more branded assets today in many cases, right? So what's been most surprising in that evolution from your perspective?
Just the power of these domains to build brands, and how much they're selling for now, right? I mean, scarcity drives the market. And then with this particular asset, a quality. I mean, there's a huge field of domains, right? You've got ultra premiums, and then you have the just really subpar domains and just kind of the junk pile, right? So I'm really talking about the creme de la creme, the top 1 to 2% of, which is always a .com in the world. Now, these particular assets are lead generators, brand enhancers, and appreciating assets. Really tough to find all three of those elements in one asset. All three lead to increased ROI and higher company valuations, while, and this is the genius part of leveraging a premium.com, reducing your incremental cost of customer acquisition. Did you hear about the voice.com sale last year? Oh my gosh. Amazing story. Here's a quote from MicroStrategy CEO Michael J. Saylor. And by the way, it sold for $30 million. Ultra premium domains like this, like voice.com, can help a company achieve instant brand recognition, ignite a business, and massively accelerate value creation. So think about it. Now, we're in the middle of a global pandemic. Everyone's online.
Yes.
Businesses were forced to pivot overnight and become agile, move all operations, all consumer touch points online. Right? So premium domain, leveraging a premium domain is the absolute best way to get found and also build your business with repeat customers. Because as you know, it's not just getting found in the first place. And by the way, premium domain helps you opt out a little bit of there's a no-win race with Google, right? There's just, you can't win. They're always changing. They're a monolith. And so when you have a premium domain, not only does it help you with proper SEO and content, get that premium ranking, especially if you buy a keyword domain, talk about racing to the top of the pack. But it's also instantly memorable and credible, which helps conversions and also really heavily drives repeat business.
That's right. So let's go a little deeper into that, Kate. So $30 million for a premium domain is for most people completely unattainable, and frankly could be really risky. Can you create an ROI case for that $30 million? You obviously need to have some sort of substantiated business idea behind that. How do you think about, for an early stage company or a company that has a vision, how can they think about domain, think about brand today, and where they may be able to go in the future? And should they even be distracted by premium domain ideas in the early stages?
Well, I think that this is one of my favorite quotes by Paul Graham, of course, famously of Y Combinator. Obviously, very relevant to this conversation. So he very famously said, if you have a US startup called X and you don't have X.com, you should probably change your name, That's a big statement. He went on to say another big statement. The problem with not having the .com of your name is that it signals weakness. Unless you're so big that your reputation precedes you, a marginal domain suggests you're a marginal company. And even if the name doesn't even particularly relate to what you do, for instance, like Stripe, but it's a cool, short, one word, memorable.com with instant power and credibility. And they have stripe.com. I could give you I have so many amazing test case and case studies and client testimonials. Hive.com is another great mini case study on brand equity. And here's the other thing in the space with startups. They pick a name, they pick a word without thoroughly vetting it. So there are 12 companies that call themselves Hive, but only one can own the .com. So when Hive decided to invest in their exact match premium.com, hive.com, they saw a 45% increase in their traffic overnight. That's the power of a premium.com. That's brand equity.
So how do I, let's say I don't have $1 million today to buy hive.com, or I don't know that's, if I'm trying to do market product validation, let's say, of like, have I built the right solution to a problem that's worth solving and customers willing to pay for it? Could I, as an example, start with thehive.com or something that I might be able to get off the ground with, and then maybe later, and I think I've seen this with the number of companies that have had to start with a .net or .io or some other name only to get enough market traction to later acquire the .com domain. What do you see as the, I guess, practical options here? Because it's just, I think for most people, it's just a sheer capital issue in the early stages of, is this the right place to invest the capital when I'm still trying to figure out, do I even have something?
Yeah, that's a great question. I have so many ideas on this. Where do I start?
I love it.
One thing about investing capital, one of the great things about a premium domain is if the business fails, the domain is still very valuable.
Sure. Yeah.
So, there's really, it's like you're going to buy a great house in a fabulous neighborhood, but you've never really lived in that town before. But you know that even if you don't like the town, that house is going to hold its value and you can sell it when you're done with it. And if not even hold its value, will most likely appreciate in value. We saw that with fly.com. They used it to build their business, Travelzoo, and then, made 7 figures on the sale, right? There's no downside. Now, I understand sometimes companies don't have that capital or don't have access to that capital when they're in the naming phase. And so to your point, a lot will do, get, then the name, then the name, try, then the name, .com. That's certainly a valid use case. In fact, I also work on the domain acquisition side, and many of my domain acquisition clients come to me and say, hey, we're operating on, this is not a real, I'm just going to say, getlamps.com. And we've gotten another round of funding, and we know in order to dominate, we need to somehow acquire lamps.com. Can you help us? Can you protect your identity? Somehow identify the owner, because of course, now with privacy laws, and it's incredibly difficult to do so, and negotiate on our behalf to get favorable terms. And so that's something that I do on pretty much a daily basis. But here's the danger of that. There's 2 dangers to that. One is, while you're branding, go to lamps.com, get lamps.com, guess who you're really branding? Lamps.com. That's who you're branding. So you have a huge risk of leakage, email leakage, traffic leakage, brand equity leakage. And the other risk,
you just don't want to do it for very long, is what you're sort of intimating. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. And the other risk that you run is, if you buy the name when you are a startup, you haven't built a lot of equity into it. Like if you're Stripe and you want to buy stripe.com and you're early funding, you could probably get it for a reasonable amount of money. If you go to buystripe.com when you're a huge company,
Sure,
guess what? They're gonna figure it out.
Yeah.
And the name just, went to a 10x. So that's another danger you run. But there are other options. While certainly the most straightforward and most common is to purchase the domain name outright, there are many other options. There's payment plans, either financed by the seller or by another entity, like Linvo, for instance. Leasing a domain name is another solid option, either a straight lease or lease with option to buy. Less popular, but it's still done, is a cash plus equity deal on a domain or some similar partnership. I guess what I wish more founders knew is that most sellers are really reasonable people. They're entrepreneurs themselves, they're risk takers themselves. And especially if you're working with a good broker to represent your interests. And many sellers will offer 0% interest on a solid offer and allow the buyers to have full use of the domain name to build their business, upon receipt of a down payment and an executed purchase agreement. There's no, talk about win-win, there's no downside here.
Sure.
And I find most founders are shocked when I tell them that. They're like, wait, see, I could do this now. They would actually do that? I'm like, yeah, they would actually do that.
Well, that's a key reason why I wanted to have this conversation right now, is to put this out there, because I totally agree with you that, and I've been fortunate in my last 2 startups, we've really had premium domains as a key part of the strategy. One of them was an outright purchase early on. One was a lease, and I think there is an equity component as well. And it does help. It's memorable. It helps. So I am absolutely a believer. So let's go back a little bit. We were talking about name. You were talking about, as an example, that there could be, in the Hive case, there could be, many companies that are using a name that often can dissuade a founder from starting with that name, even if the premium domain might be available to use in some way. Like, how do you encourage people to think about startup naming? I mean, we work with a lot of early stage companies. We have one right now that has a 2-word name, and we're already saying we think we should start to think about a 1-word of the 2 words, the 1-word name, and maybe even think about a premium domain, play with it. So we're going to have some things to talk about, off the air for sure. But because you think about choosing a name, what is it that you sort of think about from an elements and even doing research standpoint? Obviously, you could start with, hey, I'm just going to see if the .com's available for me to buy from GoDaddy. Usually that's going to be very difficult in this day and age.
It doesn't happen.
Yes, exactly. So guide me through, I'm a startup founder. I don't have a name yet, or I have a working idea. How are you going to guide me?
Yeah. Naming projects are some of my absolute favorites, because Buckley Media does not only premium domain acquisition and sales, but also naming and branding. I love it. It's so much fun. It's amazing to sit down with the founders and really get to know what their passion is and what their purpose is. What's the purpose of this company? How do they want their end users to feel when they engage with this product or service? Primarily when we work with companies on naming projects, we encourage them to get very clear on what they want to stand for, what they want to convey to not only stakeholders and end users, but also the public at large. And that all, and of course we have exercises to get to that process, but get the name right and you're halfway there. And it's also important to be very clear on your parameters. All parameters should be established up front, after which you'd conduct exhaustive research, as you mentioned, generate a curated list of names that match not only the scope, but your ethos, the spirit of the company. You then want to generate a master list of names that fit those parameters. And then you would conduct testing, conduct market testing, as well as robust pre-screening. What I mean by that is USPTO database, a light trademark search, domain availability, of course, as you mentioned, search engine testing, and to quickly speak to domain availability, you mentioned search and GoDaddy. Just because, and this is another misconception that I run into a lot with founders. And then from the they say, "Oh, well, I would love to have X.com, but it's simply not available." I'm like, "Well, of course it's not available. They've all been gone since the mid-90s. Way too long, but that's not the point. The high notes would be I can probably perceived market credibility. I mean, of course, market leadership. There are some establishes company product or service dominance, easy to spell, high memorability, passes the radio test, right? Advantageous brand recall. SEO, SEM, traffic opportunity, search and positioning, CPC opportunity. Sure. And then that's another thing that a lot of founders don't realize is that with premium domains, there are increased click-through rates due to users' recognition, familiarity, trust, and respect for a premium.com. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, those are just some of the parameters that I do. And we find that is the best path forward to creating immediate brand equity and naming.
That's awesome. Well, that's a great list for people to, I think, even sort of orient to. So let's twist that a little bit. What do you think about this idea of that kind of nonsensical, made up, new word type domain that maybe it's short? And I was talking to a founder yesterday who has a 5-letter new word that she created, and she's building now brand equity, or attempting to build brand equity around that. How do you think about that in contrast, as an example, to a very well-known word that exists out there?
I think it's risky. I think it's dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
You can spend millions of dollars branding a nonsense word or a very subpar domain. Or you can spend a fraction of that and acquire an instantly credible and memorable domain that works for you, instead of you working to brand a nonsense name from scratch. Mm-hmm. One could even argue that a founder is in breach of fiduciary responsibility to shareholders if they don't pick a solid name and then control that brand and address by locking down the exactmatch.com. It's a one-time investment that yields a lifetime of benefits for the corporation. No other asset class on earth with those attributes brings so much value to your business and costs only $9 a year.
Mm-hmm. Oh, great. I mean, and I think, a lot of people would challenge that assertion, but I think it's great that you have such clarity around that. So it's awesome.
Yeah, and I'll give you a quick example of one of the domain names that I'm taking to market right now that I'm really excited about, mm-hmm. engage.com. Mm-hmm. I mean, the search for customer engagement is bigger now than at any point in history. Mm-hmm. I feel right now premium.coms are tremendously undervalued based on lifetime value and utility. Mm-hmm. To use the example of engage.com, a company could easily spend $10 to $50 million in advertising to capture exactly what a one-time investment in a domain like engage.com mm-hmm. would bring. And not only for the savings on SEO and SEM, but they tend to send more traffic than anything else, like my hive.com example, giving any acquirer a solid head start right out of the gate.
So what, I don't know if you're at liberty to say it, like just speculatively, what do you think that type of domain is going to trade for right now?
7 to 8 figures.
Mm-hmm. So in that sort of on the edge. Okay. That's a lot. That's a big, but it could be, you could be an enterprise SaaS company that is building something in that space and just decides, hey, we're going to change our name to really elevate ourselves in an otherwise competitive space, right?
Mm-hmm. That's exactly it. And to your point, digital competition is fiercer than at any time in history. The status quo has been blown sky mm-hmm. high. So to compete, you have to give people the best chance to find you online, and that means owning your best mm-hmm. brand or categorykiller.com.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting. So we were talking off the air. You've been here. You mentioned you came out here, for Palm Springs and then LagunaBeach.com. Uh-huh. What's your sense? You have clients all over the world. You've traveled extensively as well. As you think about Orange County as a business community, as a innovative technology area. Like, how do you describe it to yourself or to others who ask about Orange County? Because, you know, a key part of my impetus for doing this is to draw more attention both to the area, because there is amazing stuff and amazing people like you here, and even in Southern California for that matter. So how do you think about this as a business area?
You know, I haven't been very involved and connected with the startup scene in Orange County, and I think there's two reasons for that. I think one is, as you point out, my clients are global, so I'm on Zoom and calls, or I used to be on planes all day, all over the world. So I haven't dug in, really drilled down within Orange County. Now, I've really enjoyed my experiences. I mean, you and I met at a round table in LA.
That's right.
We're like, wait, how did we not meet in Orange County? This is crazy, right? So I love what you're doing. I love that you are providing an on-ramp for more people to get involved with the startup community, with the business ecosystem, with the founder and venture ecosystem in Orange County. I think it's incredibly necessary.
Yeah, and you know, the crazy thing is, I've been here longer than you. I think everything's here. That's the thing, is if there were huge gaps in talent. I mean, I built companies here with hundreds of people, and they're great, and I know they can compete on a global stage with capability, and you can do it here, and we have clear evidence of that. We have companies here that are billion-dollar companies that were born and raised here in this area, and so we have everything that we need. We don't have the connective tissue to make it as efficient to move things forward. And so it's hard. I always talk about it as, it's hard enough to be an entrepreneur, you know, to have to suffer and sort of do it in a place that's not well connected, that's not as supportive. Those things we just need to put those in place, and we can support each other, encourage each other, and even, I would say, preference each other. And I think everybody, it's sort of that abundance mindset of everybody can do better as a result, right? You'd much rather work with more local clients and companies if you could. We all prefer to do business with people we can see and touch and be near and ride a bike to, versus have to get on an airplane. And I think you know, an environment like this highlights that more than ever. And you know, I'm hoping that this actually helps accelerate some of these things to people sort of invest a little more in their backyard. And for the people here, I think that's great. But we have to talk about it. We have to be more intentional. And I appreciate you know, you're sharing, but it is about, we all just are, I think the more mindful we are about it, the better.
Yeah.
And then it will start to happen.
And I love the metaphor that you used, Carrie, of connective tissue. You are providing connective tissue. You're providing a scaffolding, you know, bring all these, you know, disparate parts together. I just think, like, to your point, it's all here. We have world-class everything all here. But, you know, to date, there hasn't been that connective tissue, that scaffolding, that sort of path to entry. So I think you building that is so incredibly valuable, and marrying that with getting the word out, with creating awareness. Because I think that's the other part of the issue. There's just been an overall lack of awareness. But there's so much to be gained. I mean, I would be so excited to, when we can attend events again, to start, you know, attending some of these events. I mean, I think about the business relationships that I have locally and how I made them. You know, I sold a domain to a guy I met at a fundraiser for Big Brother, Big Sisters, right? You just never know how you're going to meet people. And I love working, you know, locally with fellow entrepreneurs and colleagues. So I'm really excited about what you're doing.
Well, I appreciate it. I mean, I think your point is a great one. I mean, there's serendipity that happens in scenarios where you just show up. But I think the more you can be intentional about that, you're going to just increase those odds. Because if you 100%. show up to 20 things and none of that serendipity really happens because it's a lot of irrelevant connections, you start to lose that steam and lose that the energy to go do the next one and the next one. And so part of this is about just being more intentional. And that's been a big part of our strategy, is say, okay, if we're trying to solve for the next generation of entrepreneurs, and they're sitting there thinking, okay, I need to get a name, and I need to figure out how I'm going to build what I'm going to build, and I'm going to need people, and I'm going to need capital. They need a place or places to know I can do that in a relatively easy or relatively efficient way, versus I have to go figure all this out on my own for the first time. That just says we're not getting, as a community, we're not getting the leverage. And people know in the Bay Area, as an example, there's tremendous efficiency and there's tremendous leverage, and they just keep, reinvesting and refueling that. And that's what I think communities of the future that are going to do well are going to be much more intentional about that. Yeah. And so I look at it, I'm happy to go first and put my money where my mouth is and say, hopefully we'll draft more of the willing to participate.
Yeah. I love it. Well said.
Well, I may need your help to help brand it, because maybe that's what we're missing is, that branding and credibility to drive it forward faster. So we'll have to talk more about that.
That would be a fun project.
So last thing, one of the things I always ask my guests to do, share a piece of advice or a key lesson that you feel like you've learned along the way. So as you think about this next generation of entrepreneurs around here who are, that the fire's starting to burn, they're thinking about their idea and they need to go get some help. What advice or key lesson that you've learned would you love to impart?
Gosh, wow. Okay, let me just pick one.
Sure.
Be in community and don't be afraid to ask for help. So another thing that I do, it's really more of like my great passion is coaching. Mm-hmm. I'm a certified professional coach, and I love executive coaching. I love working with founders and driven entrepreneurs and bright CEOs. Mm-hmm. I love it. And, I talk to them, and so many feel isolated. Mm-hmm. And so many feel that they've lost their life-work balance, and they're not sure how to leverage their particular strengths and weaknesses as well, and surround themselves with the right people to achieve their mission. And so, all of that can be helped by being in community. Mm-hmm. So by having resources like you are providing the connective tissue for, by having regular mentorship groups, by even just an informal group of fellow founders that you meet for coffee once a week. There's so many resources out there. Don't be afraid to ask for help. Don't be afraid to raise your hand and say, I feel like I'm in a little over my head. Because at the end of the day, we're all in this together. That's right. And I think remembering that you're not alone, we're all in this together, and don't be afraid to ask for help.
Awesome. Okay, that's so good. So thank you so much for joining me today, for really taking us on this premium domain and brand journey that I think is not talked about nearly enough. I'm sure you would agree, and how important that is ultimately to the potential success, and is almost a way to, in some cases, shortcut yourself to early traction in a business and stand out. Yes. And so I really appreciate the conversation. I think my audience will greatly value this as well. And you're doing your part to accelerate these businesses, and let's continue to work together on how we do more of that here as well. So
I'd love it.
Great to see you, and we'll talk soon.
Great to see you, Carrie. Thanks so much.
You've just listened to Accelerate OC. Join our live recordings every Tuesday morning at accelerateoc.com, or listen, like, and share anytime from your favorite podcast spot. Let's accelerate OC together.